Hey y'all, good afternoon. Welcome to my month of May reading wrap up. I have been on a reading roll this month so far. Right now it is May 11th and I have 5 books to talk to you guys about already. So I think it's going to be a good reading month. And I mean, unless I just randomly slow down, which is very possible depending on how my month goes. But I've had a lot of reading time the first 11 days, so I have a lot to talk about today. And let's jump right in. The first book that I read in May was A Moonbow Night by Laura Frantz. And you guys know that last month I read The Rose and the Thistle by Laura Frantz, and I really loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It was the second Laura Frantz book I had read. And the first one that I had read, A Bound Heart, was also really good. I gave that one 4 stars, I think. I didn't give it 5 stars, but I did like it. So A Moonbow Night was my 3rd Laura Frantz book. And I was really looking forward to it, especially coming off of The Rose and the Thistle, because I loved The Rose and the Thistle. So I was like, ooh, here's another book that's really exciting. First of all, I found this book on somebody's reading blog when I was just going through looking at Christian books. And the person, I don't know who this person was. I had never read their reading blog before, but they put A Moonbow Night on there and they gave a little blurb about it. But the blurb, I kind of get how they wrote that blurb thinking it represented the book, but when I actually read the book, it was not what I was expecting based on the blurb. And I read the back of the book when I checked it out from the library, and the back of the book was totally different from that person's blurb. So it's not like they were copy and pasting or anything. They were giving their own blurb for the book, and it just, I don't know. Based on their blurb, I kind of thought we were getting a historically accurate Robin Hood gender bend kind of thing. It was talking about how in the 1770s, in this Kentucky wilderness, there's a girl who's all woodsy and lives in the woods and's got a bow and arrow, and it's going to take these guys on a trip or whatever. And I don't know, I just thought reading that person's blurb that it was going to be a 1770s wilderness girl Robin Hood kind of, without the stealing, because I didn't get that in the verb. I don't know, it just gave me that vibe. That's not what the book was. And so that was the first surprise I got. Secondly, I just didn't love this book. What the book is actually about is in the 1770s, there is a group of surveyors going to the Kentucky Territory, and they're basically mapping it out for future settlers. And in the woods, in the wilderness, they find this inn called the Moonbow Inn. It's called that because there's a waterfall there that on the full moon can sometimes create a moonbow in the mist, which is a real thing. I Googled it. It's just a nighttime rainbow. It's really cool. Anyway, so they go there and they're looking for a guide that would take them to the wilderness so that they can survey. And the daughter of the widow innkeeper that lives there, she's the best guide around, so they hire her. And she kind of takes off with them to survey. But she doesn't really want to go with them. First of all, they're surveyors, which the people who live in the wilderness call them land stealers, because they're basically setting it up for future settlers. And the people who are already living there are kind of well, this is just the wilderness. We live in the wilderness. We don't want it settled or whatever. So she doesn't really want to go with them for that reason, but she also doesn't really want to go with them because she's one girl and there are 8 guys, and she's this is really improper. Even me, living in the wilderness with nobody else around, understands that this is really improper. But anyway, because of some circumstances that come to light, she needs to go with them. So they hire her and she goes. And then a little romance develops between her. Her name is Temp. It's short for Temperance. A little romance developed between her and the head surveyor. His name is Scion. And yeah, that's pretty much the plot. I didn't love this book. I really didn't. it was just, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it was historically accurate, so I will give Laura Frantz that. But I think I was just in the mood for something a little more fun and a little more lighter. So, like, reading almost 400 pages of them tromping through the wilderness, hiding from Indians, and being dirty and being crass, and yeah, I just didn't love it. Especially because, like, there are a bunch of Indian tribes on the warpath trying to get the white settlers out, and they're like both Tempeh and Scion. Temp. I think her name is Temp. I called her Temp throughout the whole book, but then at one point there's like this thing where it's kind of describing, like Scion is kind of like running through the woods, and it describes like him taking steps, and like each step is like pounding out her name, and just the way it described it made me think that her name is actually Tempeh, like it's 2 syllables. That's the way the description made me. So I called her Temp the whole time, but I think her name is actually Tempeh. Not sure. Anyway. Where am I going with this? The point is that both Tempeh and Scion both lost loved ones to Indian attacks, so they both have like a lot of bitterness towards the Indians. Even though Tempeh does have like an Indian friend that goes with them, like that's one of her stipulations when they hire her, is that her Indian friend has to go with her because she thinks he'll help keep it proper, I guess. I don't know. So even though she has one Indian friend, they both have a lot of bitterness towards the Indians, and the Indians are on the warpath right now, so the whole group is like worried about Indian attacks, and they come across a couple Indian parties at some point, like war parties, and they're hiding from them and all this stuff. And that's a big part of the novel, and while I was reading it, the song Savages from Pocahontas kept popping in my head, and I never liked Pocahontas as a kid. I'm sorry if y'all loved it. I know a lot of people who really loved it. I didn't like it as a kid, and I haven't really watched it again as an adult because I didn't like it as a kid, but, you know. Anyway, so that song kept popping in my head, so that was annoying because I don't like that song. But that's the vibe I got, and there is a lot of stuff about forgiveness and moving on and second chances and all of that, and all of that's really good, and I liked the relationship between Tempeh and Scion, but even with those, like, good faith elements and good, like, relationship, I still just didn't really love it, especially, like, there are a few scenes when they're, like, describing Indian attacks and stuff, which are pretty, like, brutal. Like, there are a few characters that, you know, like I said, they both have loved ones who've died in the past. There are also a few characters in the present who died from Indian attacks, and some of it is just like, oh, I did not need that image in my head. And yes, it is accurate because the Indian and settler wars were really brutal on both sides. Like, both sides were really brutal and violent to each other, so I can't really, like, argue with that. Like, it's totally accurate. It's just, I just didn't want that image in my head, and anyways, I didn't love this book, and yeah, I have to give it, like, 2 stars. I just didn't like it. And a lot of it may have been, like, I just was in the mood for something a little lighter. Maybe if I wanted something really emotional, I would have liked it more. But really, I think it had a lot to do with, like, there was nothing glossed over in this book. And it was a hard time in history, and that shows in the book. And so while I appreciate her attention to historical detail, and I appreciate that, it was not for me. At least not at this time. It was not for me. And that's, yeah, I've talked enough about that. Moving on, the next book I read was the Magnolia Duchess. Oh, wow, I'm great. I was going to start with this. I am doing the Southern Charm Readathon, and so every book so far on this list, it is for a prompt in the Southern Charm Readathon, which is done by a lot of great book influencers. I learned about it from Book Lover Amanda. I will put that bingo card up on the screen. So a Moonbow night was for the prompt. What did I read that for the prompt of? I did that for a book in multiple genres because it's historical fiction. It's a romance. I would call it kind of a suspense because of, like, they're like waiting for Indian attacks and they're kind of hiding from it. So in my mind, I thought it was a little suspenseful. So yeah, multiple genres. That's what that was. Anyway, now on to the second book I read, since I totally forgot to mention that prompt at the beginning of the video. The second book I read was The Magnolia Duchess by Beth White, and that book, it was for a book with more than one point of view prompt from the 7 Charm Readathon. It actually had 4 points of view in this book, but they're like, and usually when I see a book with 3 or 4 points of view, I'm like, okay, we're jumping around too much, we're not getting enough information in each storyline. But I did not think that with this book at all, mainly because it's 4 point of views, but it's all in one timeline. So that was really good. It just helped us see the story from a lot of different angles. Also, while there's 4 point of views, we spend most of the time between 2 of them. There are like 2 main characters, and then there are like 2 more kind of secondary characters that have their own storylines. So yeah, we get the multiple storylines, but it's all on the same timeline and they all intertwine, so it all works together. The Magnolia Duchess is the 3rd book in the I don't know the name of the series. I am doing so well in this video. Oh my goodness. I want to call it the Linear Family series because it follows the same family through timeline. So I'm just going to call it the Linear Family series. Maybe that's not right. We'll see. But it's the 3rd book. It takes place during the War of 1812. And there is the Patriot Linear family. They're living on Mobile Point, which is like on the cove of Mobile, Alabama. There's like, the map kind of comes down like this. Here's like Mobile up here, and it kind of comes down, and they're kind of living on the little point right here where you can get into the bay from the ocean, basically. And the main girl, her name is Fiona. She's out riding one day and she comes across this body, and he's in the sand, he's on the beach. He's clearly washed up from some kind of shipwreck or storm or something, and he's unconscious. She rolls him over, only to be surprised to find out that it is her old friend, Charlie Kincaid, who she met in England when she was a child traveling with her diplomatic aunt and uncle. So she's like, oh my goodness, this British dude washed up on my beach in the middle of the War of 1812. Obviously, he is an enemy soldier, so I should turn him in. But at the same time, this is my childhood friend who I had a little childhood crush on. Like, I can't just turn him in. Well, and especially because he's in civilian clothes, which means he's probably a spy. And so she's like, I can't turn him in because he'll probably be hung as a spy. And I don't want to do that. But at the same time, if I don't turn him in, I could be arrested for treason when they find out because I'm harboring an enemy soldier. So yeah, there's that. But she ends up kind of hiding him in her house. And when he comes to, they realize that he has no memories. He has amnesia. Like, he remembers up to the time when he's like 10, and then everything after being 10 years old, he has no memory of. And so throughout the book, his memory comes back, and he's kind of realizing things slowly. But by the time his memory comes back, he's already in love with Fiona and her family, and so things get complicated. Their political beliefs are tested, their relationship gets complicated. A lot happens in this book. A lot. The other points of view, the other 2 point of view, one is her cousin, whose name starts with an M. I want to say it's Meg or Maddie. It's Maddie. Her name is Madeline. Her cousin Maddie, who is a widow, her husband was a soldier. He died before the war, though, before the War of 1812. He died in Canada, I think. So she's a widow raising a young son, and she has a little bit of her own story and her own romance. And then the other point of view is with her cousin on the other side of the family, Sahoy. Sahoy is Native American. She's like a really, really distant cousin from like way, way back in like the great-grandmother's side or something. But she is Native American, and General Jackson comes through and he rounds up her tribe and they send them to the reservation, but she doesn't want to go to the reservation, so she hires somebody to take her to the Laniers, who are her very distant cousin, and she stays with them. So she has her own little storyline as well. And that's really all I can give you about that book without giving away spoilers, except to say I really love this book. Like, this is exactly what I needed, especially after being so disappointed by A Moonbow Night. Like, I really needed just a light, fun read. And despite the fact that this is, like, kind of intense with the whole harboring fugitives and spies and everything like this, like, it's just fun. It's very fun. They're funny. They're cute. Like, there's a couple times that, like, if I were her, I would have probably slapped Charlie a little bit, but... And she does. She does not take anything from him. She's like, I'm risking a lot to harbor you here, so I need you to, like, sit down, buddy. They're just fun. I had a lot of fun with this book, so I gave it 4 stars. And then the next book I read, the third book I read this book, is The Creole Princess by Beth White, which is the second book in that same series, so I'm just kind of going backwards here with that series, which is not what I would suggest, but it's what I'm doing, because sometimes I do things like that. So The Creole Princess I used for the Howdy Partner prompt in the Southern Charm Readathon, which is a book featuring friendship or family, because this one, it has, I want to say 3 points of view. It might have a 4th in there for, like, just a second. Simon might have had, like, a point of view at one time. I don't think he did, though. I don't think we were ever in his point of view. It has 3, though. So this jumps back following their family in the American Revolution. And we have 2 girls that are best friends. One girl, her name is... I cannot remember names today. Daisy, thank you, brain. Her name is Daisy, and she is the daughter of a British commander who's holding a fort. He's the commander of a British fort in Mobile, and she's his daughter, and she is best friends with a Creole girl. Names. Why can't I do names today? Whose name is... I'm going to have to look it up. Lise. Her name is Lise. So, Lise and Daisy are best friends. And Daisy is obviously, she's the daughter of the British commander. She's pretty rich. She lives in the fort. And Lise is a French Creole girl who has African American blood in her. She's like the lowest of the low on the town's totem pole, except for actual slaves. Her mother was a free black woman, and so she is above slaves because she's a free woman and she's half black, half French. So she has that going on. Anyway, so they're a very unlikely friendship. Also unlikely is that Daisy is in love with Lisa's brother, Simon, and then Lise falls very quickly in love with a Spanish trader who comes to town. His name is Rafa. So we get points of view from mainly Lisa and Rafa. They're the 2 main characters, but we also get the point of view of Daisy. And this is during the American Revolution, and things happen, ties are tested, and political alliances shift, and there are some loyalists here, there are some patriots here, there are some spies here. I can't really give it all away because it would give it away, but I just really liked it. I really like spy novels in general, like, especially in historical fiction. Like, I just really enjoy them. And these were spy novels. Both of these Beth White books had spies in them, but they're very lighthearted spy novels. So that was fun. Like, I got to laugh and smile and still get that spy intrigue that I like. So yeah, it was awesome. Sorry. I gave this book 4 stars as well. It was really good. Both of the Beth White books gave me kind of like Christian version of Ellsworth Thane novels, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know if you've read Ellsworth Thane. She is a quite old author who has a series that follows like one multi-generational family from the American Revolution all the way through like somewhere in the 20th century. I don't know when her last book actually is, probably like the 1940s or something. It's called the Women of Williamsburg series, I believe, because the first book takes place in the American Revolution in Williamsburg. But yeah, I loved Elizabeth Thane as like a young girl. Like my mom's a big Elizabeth Thane fan, and I read the Elizabeth Thane books like in late high school. Although I would say they're definitely adult books. But yeah, it gave me like a Christian Elizabeth Thane kind of vibes, these two books did. So that was really interesting. Okay, so the fourth book I read this month was Fairest of Heart by Karen Witemeyer. I got this as a NetGalley ARC. It comes out in June, and I love Karen Witemeyer. She's one of my automatic buy authors. I have a bunch of her books right behind my head back here, and this is the first book in her fairy tale retelling series, and it's very interesting because she writes Western romance. All of her books take place in Texas, and so taking fairy tales and writing them into a Texas Western book is a very interesting challenge to take on. Her first book is Snow White, and we have the main character is Penelope Snow, who is a very beautiful woman and who works for a very beautiful actress, but gets in some trouble, and the actress kind of wants her to disappear. So she has her henchmen take her out to the woods and tie her to a tree and leave her to die. But she is rescued by a group of 7 old men who live on a ranch together, which are obviously a play on the 7 dwarves. They're old men, they're all retired, and they're just chilling on a ranch together. And the old man who owns the ranch, who is Doc, his grandson, Titus, is a Texas Ranger, and he's kind of like Prince Charming or Prince Florian in the Snow White fairy tale. And yeah, so it's a Snow White retelling. So there are a lot of elements in there that she tied from Snow White into like a realistic Western Christian romance. And I thought that was very interesting. I thought she did a really good job tying the fairy tale elements of the story into a more realistic, like this could actually happen in real life, Western romance. Like with the dwarves being just 7 old men that live together that each have personalities that kind of fit the dwarf they're supposed to be. Like, for example, like the dwarf that's supposed to be dopey, he had a head injury, and so he's just kind of not all there anymore. And so he's a really big part of the story as well. I'm like, yeah. The dopey, the old man that's supposed to be bashful, his name is actually Coy. So I was kind of like, oh, I see what you did there, Karen Witemeyer. But yeah, I love Karen Witemeyer books. This wasn't my favorite. Like, I gave it 3.5 stars, which is not a bad review, but for me, Karen Witemeyer books are like almost, like a lot of them are 5 stars, and the rest are like usually 4 stars or 4.5 stars. So to give it 3.5 stars was just my way of saying it's not my favorite Karen Witemeyer book, but it was still cute. It was still good. There was a lot of like, obviously from the Snow White fairy tale that she's supposed to be really, really beautiful, and beauty is a big part of that fairy tale, and beauty was a big part of this one. And I appreciated that they went into the fact that Penelope, her beauty is skin, like she has a lot of beauty on the outside, but her beauty is also, in her character and her spirit. But I did feel like when they were talking about beauty with both Penelope and Madame Labelle, who is like the evil villain, the focus is focused on their chest size a lot. I felt like both women are very well endowed, and it's mentioned a lot. And they do mention other things, like they, they have smooth skin and they have nice faces and everything, but I felt like their bust was like a main focus of the beauty, and it was a little weird to me. I was like, okay, I get it. Are we gonna say it again? Like, okay. So there was that. But overall, it was just a really cute story, a really sweet story. It just wasn't my favorite Karen Witemeyer, so I only gave it 3.5 stars. And maybe that's because I was never all that big a fan of Snow White in general. It wasn't my favorite fairy tale growing up, so it's not my very favorite fairy tale adaptation. Titus was cool. I liked his story, and I liked how his story tied into, like, the fairy tale, like, his backstory had to do with the big components of the Snow White fairy tale, so I thought that was interesting. I had nothing to dislike about Titus, but I also had nothing that really set him apart from the crowd, especially in light of the fact that so many of Karen Witemeyer's heroes are people that I love, like Malachi, or, yeah, she just has a lot of heroes in her books that I really, really love, and so Titus was nice. He was a good hero. He just didn't jump out as somebody that I absolutely adored. And that's kind of like how I felt about this whole book. It was a good book in comparison to others, but in comparison to some other Karen Witemeyer books, it was just one of her books. Okay. So I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a Nat Galley arc, so look for it June 6th, and I will be doing a more in-depth video review of it coming up. Yeah. The 5th book that I read this month is 16 Brides by Stephanie Grace Whitson. I actually have this one to hold up. Let me just read you the back cover of this because it's only like a few lines here. It says, when 16 potential brides step off the train in Plum Grove, Nebraska, the town may never be the same again. Join Stephanie Grace Whitson for this spirited tale of courageous women who risk everything for the dream of owning land and finding love on the prairies of Nebraska. So it's a really short little description there. It just basically says, like, 16 brides get off a train and chaos happens. Like, that's it. That's the whole description. And when I read that description, I don't know why, but I immediately thought of 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. So immediately I was like, this is going to be really funny. It's going to be a really, like, fun trip. It's going to be like 7 brides for 7 brothers, except maybe without the problematic elements of kidnapping and Stockholm Syndrome. Which, just side note, despite those problematic elements, I love 7 Brides for 7 Brothers. Like, I get that it's a problem that they kidnap women and that these women fall in love with them during captivity, and that's not great and not something we should promote, but I love it anyway. So that's kind of what I was expecting with 16 Brides, except without the kidnapping. But that's not what I got. It was not a funny read. It was not a lighthearted read for the most part. It kind of was, but not really. It was a read about past issues and forgiveness and grief and second chances, and like there was just a lot going on here. And basically, so there are 16 women who hear about what they call the Ladies Immigration Society, which basically, like, they're telling them, oh, because of the Homesteading Act, you can sign on and get like 120 acres for free, and then actually I think you get it for like $12, but then after 5 years, if you've made improvements, like, you get that land free and clear because, you know, you're homesteading. And so these 16 women, they're getting on a train to Nebraska to homestead to make new lives. And they're supposed to be going to Coyote, Nebraska, but when they're a couple stops away on the train in Plum Grove, they find out that the guy who brought them here, he's not, like, honest. Like, he convinced them of the Homestead Act, but what he actually did was he told all the single men in Coyote that he was bringing 16 brides, and he was letting these men, like, pay him to, like, dance with them and, like, stuff so that they can get married. And they're like, hold on, we did not sign up for this. You told us we were going to be able to, you know, be women homesteaders. And he's like, well, technically you can. I was just, you know, giving you options to marry or whatever. Anyway, so there are 8 women that are like, no, I'm not going to be a part of this. So they refuse to get back on the train and they stay in Plum Grove. The other 8 women are like, why not? Let's go get married. And they go on to Coyote. So these 8 women that don't want to get married, that are like, you lied to us, we're not getting back on the train with you, they stay in Plum Grove and they get 4 homesteads that meet like at like the 4 corners meet, and they build their house on that 4 corners. So basically they're all homesteading together, but 4 of them have actual land. So it's 4 homesteads all put together, and they decide to homestead together. A few of these women have romances, a few don't. There are just a lot of characters to go over. It's a whole ensemble cast, and several of the characters have very painful backstories. Like, each woman is running from something or running towards something, or is a widow or was abused, or there's a whole thing that you have to work through. I will say a trigger warning in this book. There's sexual assault in this book. One of the girls is like attacked in the pages of the book. Nothing happens, like she is like rescued at the last moment, but it's there. It's pretty early on, so it's like something that she's dealing with throughout the book, like these memories. So yeah, be aware of that. And I liked this book. Like, I didn't really have anything bad to say about it, but I also think that I'll probably forget about it pretty fast. Like, I don't think it really jumps out at me as something that's going to be that memorable, so I don't really know what to rate it, because, like, part of me wants to give it, like, 3.5 stars, but I just gave The Fairest of Heart 3.5 stars, and, like, that's a lot more memorable than this one. But this one, like, I don't really have anything to complain about, so I don't want to give it too low a score. So I think I'm just going to go with 3 stars, because it was cute. I have nothing to complain about in this book, but I just don't think it'll be that memorable. I'll probably forget about it and never read again, so 3 stars. All right, so that was for the first 5 books that I've read in May so far, and we will see you with the next ones. Hey y'all, welcome back. It is the end of May. It's the very last day of May, so I'm going to finish up my May wrap-up video. As you can see behind me over here, my bookshelf is looking a little sparse. I didn't actually unhaul anything, but I did get some new stuff from like Christian Book and stuff, and I wanted to reorganize a little bit so I could fit them in. So this whole bottom row behind me originally was all of my nonfiction history books, because I do have a degree in history, so I like nonfiction history books. But I took those and I put them in my book cubbies that are over here off camera, which means that all 3 of these levels now are just fiction on my shelves. So I was able to spread things out a little more and have room for new editions soon. So that's why things are looking a little sparse. I didn't get rid of anything. I just moved my nonfiction over to my book cubbies, which also has my classics. So just a little side note there. Now let's get into it. I have 3 finished books to talk about and 2 DNFs. I know that 3 finished books is not that much for the rest of the month, but Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom did come out this month, and if you play video games or if you are a Legend of Zelda fan, you know that we have been waiting for this game for like 6 years. It's the Breath of the Wild sequel, so Breath of the Wild came out 6 years ago, and we've been waiting for the sequel all this time, and now Tears of the Kingdom is out. So I have been playing my Switch. It's actually my mom's Switch, but I have been playing it a lot because it's Legend of Zelda. So yeah, my reading has gone way down this month, but I don't regret it because this is an amazing game. Anyway, so the first book that I finished in the second half of the month is A Rumored Fortune. So, as I've said before, I've been doing the Southern Charm Readathon, and this was the prompt for a mystery that surprised me, because I don't actually read mysteries all that much. So, Heavens to Betsy, that's the prompt. Sorry, I couldn't remember the name. A mystery or thriller that will shock you. So I don't actually read true mysteries all that much. I do like historical or contemporary Christian fiction that has an element of mystery. Like, for example, the Ladies of the Manor series by Rosanna M. White. Like, all three of those books, a lot of Rosanna M. White books, they kind of revolve around a mystery. Like, the Ladies of the Manor mystery revolves around these red diamonds. Or, like, her other series, the Secret of the Isles series, where they're treasure hunting. Like, those are kind of like treasure hunt mysteries, but they're not true to mysteries. I wouldn't count them as mystery novels. Whereas this one, Joanna Davidson Politano, is a mystery author, I believe. I would call her a mystery author. So this was, for me, something that I thought would shock me because it's more true mystery than most of the things I read. But then when I actually read it, I was surprised that it wasn't as mystery as I thought it would be. Like, when I read the back of the book, I really thought it was going to be a true mystery, because this book is about Tessa. She comes home one night to find out that her father has passed away. But the problem is that they're really rich, but he has hidden their fortune, and he kept telling her, oh, I'll tell you before I die so that you can take the fortune from me when I die. But then he dies unexpectedly, so she doesn't know where the fortune is. And then all her, like, money-grubbing relatives come around, you know, the ones that are like, ooh, I want the fortune. They come around, so then it's kind of like a race to see who will uncover the fortune first. But yeah, so reading the back of the book, I really thought it was going to be like a major treasure hunt mystery, and then it didn't turn out to be that way. It was actually more about, like, her grief and her process of becoming the person that she wants to be. And honestly, I found the journey really beautiful. Like, her father owns a vineyard, and at the beginning of each chapter, it's got these, like, quotes from, it's called a viticulturist, which I guess is a person that cultures vineyards. I did not know that's what they were called, so that was new for me. But it says things like, focus merely on having a great harvest and you will have it, but only once. Focus on the lifetime of the vine and you will have a richer harvest every year after this one. So they've got these, like, little, like, vineyard proverbs at the beginning of each chapter, and it really represents the journey she goes on, because, like, in her grief, she feels like she's being, like, stripped away of everything she is and everything she has, and all these people are being taken from her, and she has to learn that, like, God is the only one she can rely on, that, like, he is the true vine and she is the branch that's grafted into him. And there's just so much, like, biblical symbolism in this, and, like, symbolism of the Christian life in her life and in her situation. I just thought it was really beautiful. I did think that at some points it beat you over the head with it, like, it was really overt, and I was like, okay, yes, this is really obvious, we get it. Like, it was like, oh, here's this symbol, here's this allegory, look at it. And, you know, sometimes there were a few moments when I was like, okay, we could have been a little bit more subtle about this. But overall, I just felt like it was a really beautiful journey she went on, and I really enjoyed it. There is a romance in here with her vineyard manager. He's a really great guy. I loved him. Like, he's just awesome, and he's so loving and so giving, and he's amazing. And I felt like they compared him to Christ a little bit too much. Like, I felt like he was an example of that in her life. And yes, we should always be examples of Christ to other people. Like, that was a really good thing. But I felt like we didn't really focus on his flaws at all. So then it was almost like he was just, like, this really perfect thing in her life. And I was like, okay, but he's a great example of Christ, but he is not Christ. Like, we need to have a flaw in him because he is human. I don't know. That sounds weird when I actually say it out loud. I'm like, that sounds weird. But that's just the way I felt. But I did give this book 4 stars. I just thought it was really, really good. So, yes, there's that. The next one is a DNF. So that was The Melody of the Soul. This was supposed to be my emotional prompt for the Southern Charm Readathon. The Southern Charm Readathon, it was Bless Your Heart. That was the prompt. An emotional or heartwarming book. This is about a Polish Jew. Her name is Anna, and she's living in Prague. So maybe she's not Polish, maybe she's Czech. I'm sorry, that's my bad. Prague is in Czechoslovakia, so she's Czech. But all her family has been taken away to concentration camps. She hasn't been taken yet because she's been taking care of her grandmother, and so she ends up being like one of the last Jews on the list for deportation, because like the head of the deportation council put her on the bottom of the list because she's taking care of her grandmother. But in the apartment below her, a German officer moves in, and he hears her playing the violin, and he's like, this is just so beautiful. And he is against the Holocaust, against what's going on with the Jews. So he actually tries to protect her and her grandmother, but she doesn't know if she can trust him because he's a German officer, and her family and her friends and her entire community are literally being sent to their deaths by German officers. So she's like, I don't trust this guy, but he's trying to protect her. So I'd call this a soft DNF because it's not like I wanted to stop reading it. I got like 160 pages in. I'm in chapter 12 here, page 163. I just wasn't in the mood for something so emotional, and like I just wanted something lighter. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put this down and I'm going to read a couple lighter choices and then I'll come back to it because it is good and I am enjoying it. It was just too serious and emotional for me at this point of the month. And now it has to go back to the library tomorrow, so I won't have time to finish it, which is why it's a DNF. But I will probably pick it up like later at some other time and finish it because I am enjoying it and I do like emotional books. It was just not the right time for me to be reading it this time. So yeah, that is The Melody of the Soul. Can't really say much about it because I am only in chapter 12. The next book that I read is The Hidden Prince by Tessa Afshar. This is my hot as blue blazes prompt for the Southern Charm Readathon. It is a book set in a hot setting. It is set between Babylon and Medo-Persia, or Media and Persia, because they're not combined at this time. And so that's all in the Middle East. Pretty hot. Fits the prompt. It is biblical fiction. It takes place in the time of Daniel. It's about a girl named Karen. She is a servant in Daniel's household, but then something really, really tragic happens, and she is responsible for this awful accident. And so as punishment, she is banished from Babylon, and she's sent to Media, where she is told that she's going to tutor a young shepherd boy, but she figures out that this young shepherd boy is Cyrus, who is the future king of Medo-Persia, the one that in biblical prophecy will release the Jews and send them back to Jerusalem. So she's like, I have got to protect this guy. Meanwhile, there's a guy named Jared. He is her old friend from Babylon, but after this accident, he really blames her for the accident, and he doesn't want to forgive her, but he's sent to bring her home back to Babylon because her punishment ends, and they're like, okay, go bring her home because we want her to come back to Daniel's house. And when he gets there and sees that she's protecting Cyrus, then he decides to stay and help. I am not really a biblical fiction person. This is like the second biblical fiction I have ever read in my life. The first biblical fiction was a book called Lydia. It was about Lydia, the purple fabric seller from the New Testament. I read it in like 7th grade. And the only thing I remember about it is that it was short and square-shaped, and I thought that was really weird for a book. But that's the only thing I remember about that book. And it's the only other biblical fiction I've read. But I have a really good friend from college who was like, Letty, I loved The Hidden Prince. You just have to read it. So I was like, okay, I'll read it. Like, I really trust this friend. She's one of my best friends. She tells me to read a book. I'm going to read a book. And it was good. Wasn't my favorite. There were some things I didn't care for. And I think one of the things that I have a problem with biblical fiction that makes it a turnoff for me is that, like, and because this was Old Testament fiction and this was about a servant in Daniel's house, I didn't mind so much. But, like, a lot of biblical fiction are about, like, biblical characters, and I'm like, okay, but are we just... And I guess they are human. I guess my real problem is that if you have, like, a New Testament biblical fiction and, like, Jesus is there, I'm like, I just don't want to mess with God and Jesus in, like, I want their influence to be in my books and like Christian fiction, but I don't want to make them like characters because then it's like, I'm just scared to mess with it, I guess. Like, I don't want us to be projecting our human qualities onto God. And it's really hard to explain, and I hope you guys get what I'm saying. And so this wasn't so bad because this was like about a servant in Daniel's house, so I could believe this was a real person. And it didn't scare me in a way, because like I didn't feel like I was like, oh my goodness, but like, what are we going to be saying like about God, or what are we going to be making God do? Which, so yeah, it was okay for me. But one thing that bothered me was like Daniel having a family, because historically historians suggest that he would have been a eunuch, because when you took captives, especially noble captives, and made them servants in a foreign king's household, they were usually made eunuchs. So I was like, he wouldn't have a family. But I kind of get, like, the author did mention that. She was just like, I don't think we have any solid proof, so I'm going to say he wasn't. So I was like, okay, that's your thing. Do that. There was a couple pieces of gruesome description in here, mainly towards the end of the book. Like, it had to do with the king's punishment of one of his nobles. I can't tell you because it would spoil it, but, like, when I pictured it, I was like, oh my goodness. And it is historically accurate. Like, a king totally would have done that. And we actually see accounts of that happening in the Bible. But it was just, it wasn't a visual I wanted. Anyway, yeah, I have a lot of, like, conflicting thoughts about this book, mainly just because biblical fiction isn't my favorite, but I thought this was okay. Like, I might read some other Tessa Afshar, I might not, depending on what mood I am. I did enjoy it mostly. So I gave it 3 stars, because I was like, yeah, it was pretty good, and also kind of annoying and kind of weird, and yeah, I'm not making sense with this one. I feel like I just have a stigma about biblical fiction. I don't know why, like, I just do. Anyway, that's that. So the next book I read was a NetGalley arc, and it's called To Tango by Kathleen Fuller. I believe it comes out in June or July, but I'll have to check on that, and I can like put it on the screen or in the description box with the actual date, because I can't remember. It was, yeah, I think it was, I don't think I had a prompt for this one, because I think I finished all the prompts with the previous books. So I think it was just NetGalley arc I read. It was really cute. It was about like this couple. They go on this date at the beginning of the book, but then he forgets to call, and so she kind of gets mad at him, and then she gives him another chance, and then he forgets to call again, and then so flash forward like a year, and he's back in her life, and she's like, 2 strikes and you're out. I'm not giving you a third chance. But then there's like all these like old women in the book, old meddling women who are like, oh no, we have to get these 2 together. So they're really like trying to get them together, and they use a dance class to do it. It's pretty cute. It's the 4th book in a series, which I have not read any of the other books. I've never read this author before. I just like found this book on NetGalley and thought that looks cute. Let me get that arc. So I probably will go back and read the first 3 books, because I just found them kind of cute and charming. Nothing special, I'm afraid. And there were things that annoyed me in this book. Like, I felt like there was a lot, like, this whole distrust thing kind of got dragged out. And I thought that when they actually, like, got together, we'd see some of that, but they didn't get together till, like, the very, very end. Which, on the one hand, I get, because that happens a lot in romances. But on the other hand, there was a part of me that was, like, that, like, felt I was still in, like, kind of the intro. And then I was like, okay, but when's it going to start? When's it going to start? When's it going to start? And then I realized I was, like, 3/4 of the way through the book. And I was like, oh, all of that, like, intro is the actual story. And I just didn't feel like we got the development that we really deserved. And I felt like I wanted to see the couple actually together a bit. Whereas, like, I guess I just felt like the beginning part was just dragged out and then ended up being the whole book. And I was like, oh, okay, that's okay. So, yeah, 3 stars for that one. It was super cute, and I will read the rest of the series, but I don't know why, I just like kept expecting the book to really get into it, and then it was over. So the last book I have to talk about is another DNF, and that is The Long March Home by Marcus Brotherton and Tessa Lee. I don't know. This is a book about 3 friends that are soldiers in the Pacific during World War II. They are in the Philippines, in Manila, and when the Japanese army takes over the Philippines right after Pearl Harbor, they sent the American soldiers on kind of like a death march. And so the story is just about these 3 soldiers being prisoners of war throughout the war and trying to make it home. I do like World War II fiction a lot. I like historical war fiction a lot. I do have a degree in history as well as a degree in English, and so I really like these books. But I guess I tend to read the World War II novels that kind of gloss over the grit a lot. Like, I read a lot of spy novels and resistance novels. I don't read a lot of novels that are like the soldiers themselves. And so when I started reading this book, I DNF'd it after 5 chapters, and it was because it was just really gritty. And in a way that's super realistic. I mean, when it was talking about the Japanese attack on the American air base in the Philippines, like, it was very realistic. But at the same time, you know, when it talked about a soldier missing his face, I was like, oh, that's an image now in my brain. So yes, realistic, but a little too gritty for me. I guess I just prefer books that gloss over that. So I did stop it because I did stop after 5 chapters because I was like, I can't handle this. I'm sorry. So that's why that was DNF'd. I'm sure it's a really good book. I picked this one up from the library because it's a part of the Revell Publishing book club for this month. They have a book club on Facebook called Rebel Roundup. You can join it for free. And so that was this month's pick, and it came out in May, and it was May's pick, so I was like, okay, I'm going to pick it up from the library, I'm going to read it. It looks like my kind of thing, because I do like World War II novels, but it was just so gritty that I was like, it's just too realistic for me. We're right there in the battle with people losing limbs, and not my thing, so I put it down. And that was all my reads for May. Thank you for joining me. I will see you in June. June should be a pretty regular month, but I will say July and August are going to be really crazy for me. In July, I have camp meeting, which I don't know if other churches do camp meeting, if you know what that is, but like my church, we do camp meetings around this day. I live in Texas, but I actually go to Oklahoma camp meeting because it's hosted at the summer camp that I went to when I was a kid. I've been going to Oklahoma camp meetings since I was like 5 years old, off and on. Like I miss some years, especially now that I've gotten older as an adult. You know, I wasn't living nearby, like I was working in another state, or I was going to grad school in another state. Like, I've missed some years of camp meeting, but we are going back this year. My mom and I are going for the week, and we're going to be taking my niece, and she's 3, and then after a camp meeting, I'm going to my sister's house, and I'm helping babysit her kids for like 2 weeks while she's working, and her husband is on a trip with his brother that they do every year. So yeah, I'm going to have camp meeting. That's like 10 days, and then I'm going to be babysitting my nieces and nephews for like 2 weeks, and then in August, at the end of August, I'm going to Orlando for a week. And so Orlando is like a vacation. I'll probably have a lot of time to read, so maybe August will be pretty normal. But like July, I'm going to be watching my 3-year-old niece at camp meeting, and then I'll be watching 4 of my nieces and nephews 2 weeks after that at my sister's house. So if you have toddlers in your life, you know it is very busy. There's not time for reading because you are just go all day long. So yeah, I have a feeling that I'm not going to read very many books in July because my life will be filled with toddlers, which is awesome because I love my nieces and nephews. I have 6 nieces and nephews. 5 of them are nieces and 1 is a nephew. I love them very, very much. So I'm excited to be able to see them in July. Yeah. So that's a little life update. And I will see you in the next video.